My name is Joida Hansen, and I have the honor today of introducing Dr. Nadya Fouad. My recollection is that Nadya approached me to be her advisor. When I think back on this, I wonder if she knew the risk she was taking. Number one, we were both very young. You were, about 12, and I was 20. And I had advised MA students before, but never PhD students. I suspect she didn't know that at the time. But, and this is very important, we shared an interest in vocational psychology that has been enduring over the past 40 years. And it didn't hurt that Nadya was smart, focused, and more than willing to do the hard work that builds the foundation that serves one well throughout her or his career. At about the same time, two other students, Dr. Jeffrey Prince and Dr. Jane Swanson, approached me, asking if I would be their advisor. Now, the stories that Nadya, Jane, and Jeff can tell about their days as graduate students at the University of Minnesota, well, suffice to say that the faculty viewed them as smart, hardworking, and serious about becoming psychologists. But I've learned over the intervening 40 years that they also had very interesting lives outside of Elliott Hall and the Department of Psychology. They knew work-life balance long before it was fashionable. Excuse me. When Nadya was awarded the Leona Tyler Award at last year's APA meeting, President Hesacker presented her with the Tyler Award plaque. And I'd like to begin by just reading a few excerpts from that very long citation. And I quote, "Like Leona Tyler, Dr. Fouad has embraced the full scope of counseling psychology, including the importance of work in people's lives, the promotion of well-being, and building on people's strengths. Dr. Fouad has been and continues to be an inspirational leader and thinker in our field. She has steadfastly trained psychologists who are culturally sensitive in providing services to diverse groups of individuals. She has led the development of measures of competencies required for graduation from APA accredited training programs and has conducted research that challenges assumptions about how work and career decisions are made for individuals from diverse backgrounds and for those who experience barriers in their vocational development. Counseling psychology is much more inclusive as a field as a result of her work." End of quote. So currently, to get you up to date on Nadya, she is a distinguished professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She holds an endowed chair, and she is editor of the Journal of Vocational Behavior, past editor of SCP's The Counseling Psychologist, and she has received numerous awards recognizing her contributions to research, teaching, and professional service. And these awards have come from all over the place, from her university, from the Council of Counseling Psychology Training Programs, from the American Psychological Association, and from local and state psychological associations. In addition to all that, she has published over 150 articles, chapters, and books, and her vita includes 13 pages of presentations. To name just a few of her many leadership positions, she is a past president of the Society of Counseling Psychology, Division 17, past chair of the Society of Vocational Psychology, and past chair of the Council of Counseling Psychology Training Programs. In all of these roles, her leadership has led to major innovations and important advancements in the profession. So what a career, right? But it's not over yet. Remember, she's very young. She's a very young new PhD. But I wanted to focus for just a couple of minutes on an extremely important component of Dr. Fouad's contributions. Let me start with an observation. Over the years, in the context of Division 17's New Fellow Talks, I have noted that one or more new fellows invariably recognizes Nadya as one of her mentors. So I thought it would be appropriate today for you to hear from some of her current and past students. Dr. Fouad has served as dissertation advisor for over 35 PhD students, and the quotes that I will read to you are excerpts selected from response of her students to my request that they provide me with some commentary on Nadya's career and their experiences of working with her. So again, I will quote, and there's a long series of them because the response was very good. "We called her our soccer mom, Mama Nadya, because she was caring, firm, and tough. She is actively invested in the community of our university, working to improve university life for students, staff, and faculty alike. Dr. Fouad has been an inspiration to all of her students, and she has been a role model for developing professionals. One of my fondest memories was having our research team meetings in her garden during the summer. Dr. Fouad finds the impossible balance between never being satisfied until you have given your absolute all and always building her students' self-efficacy through her unwavering belief in their abilities. Even though Nadya has many projects on her plate, she was always extremely present with her advisees. She made us a priority. Dr. Fouad is not the kind of academic I want to be someday. She is the kind of person I aspire to become." In my opinion, she was the heart and soul, not to mention the engine, behind the counseling psychology department. Couple more. Even now, 4 years later, after obtaining my PhD, she serves as a wonderful mentor and collaborator. Nadya's excitement to engage in meaningful research that has real-world implications is contagious. Nadya believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Most of all, she helped me look inside to discover the person I could be. So to these quotes, I would like to add a thank you to Dr. Fouad from me for also enriching my life, first as a graduate student advisee, and then as a colleague and friend over all these years. And I'm very honored to be able to present to you Dr. Nadya Fouad.
Thank you, Joida, for that incredibly generous introduction, and I really do want to see those who said those quotes. Thank you all for coming. I've started being anxious about the talk, and then I started being anxious about what nobody would come, and then my kids showed up last night, totally surprised me. My dean showed up, totally surprised me, and I'm so pleased to see everybody here. So I've approached this talk as a vocational psychologist, and as a good vocational psychologist, I've always been interested in not just what you do for your career, but why and what the motivators are. So I'm going to talk about that today. I want to start because a good vocational psychologist knows that you don't do this without talking about your life, so I'll talk some about life review, career review, more than just a little about career review, mostly about why I did what I did, and then some reflections on the future. Let me say that all of the things that Joida talked about were nothing I did by myself, and usually motivated because I got to work with the wonderful people in this profession. And so this talk will have the pronoun I more than I'm usually comfortable with, but please know it really probably ought to be we. And where appropriate, I will try to make that very clear. So life review. I am one of two kids. My brother is sitting right here, came for this talk. Thank you. Sam Fouad, who is younger than me by 3 years and 9 months, although he has white hair and I don't. I just don't know why that happens. So we are two kids of Aziz and Lisa Fouad, who, this is a picture taken of the four of us in 1970. I met my wonderful husband, Bob Lighthizer. My mother made the wedding dress, by the way. We met in 1980 at the University of Minnesota and got married in 1981. And he is here, back with my kids. Although you'll note he no longer has the beard. And then we have three boys. Nick was born in 1982. Andrew in 1988, and Patrick in 1992. This picture was 1993. Patrick, for the record, does not like that picture, but you can tell him yourself you think it's cute because he and Andrew are here with Andrew's wife, Delia, and they surprised me last night. Am I blessed or what? And then here we all are, our extended family, last summer at Andrew and Delia's wedding. By the way, that is my garden in the background. And my dad is in the front. Sadly, we lost my dad last October, but he knew about this award and was really so pleased to be able to hear about it. So, career review, and let me just go back and say this is the reason I get to do this career, because this is the backbone, this is the support, and I'm so grateful to my family of origin and my family, I guess, what do you call that, creation? Career review. So when I think about my career, I can think about 3 strands: cultural context, counseling psychology, and a deep and abiding love for counseling psychology, and my involvement in it through vocational psychology and the study of work. And usually those strands are all just one for me, but I'm going to try and talk about them each separately. So cultural context. I have been my entire career very interested in this issue of inclusion and interested in culture and the role of culture in the work that we do. I've been the one raising my hand saying we need to pay attention more to culture. And my favorite definition of culture is how a group of people come together to solve the problems of everyday living. And when you think about that applied to counseling, we need to understand how the cultural context influences healing and how healing is perceived and how healing happens within a culture. And from work, what is it that how does culture influence the work that people do, the options they have, who's involved in making those decisions, or the barriers for some people to be making those decisions? So my interest in cultural context really comes from my own cultural background. So my dad came from Egypt, my mom from Brazil, to the unlikely location of Iowa City, Iowa, both of them going to graduate school. They met there, got married in 1953, and moved to Ames when I was, do the math, I'm 62, yeah, I'm 62. But I was born in Ames, Iowa, while my dad was finishing his PhD in electrical engineering. He needed to go back to Egypt, and they left in 1956, and so I spent those first few years in Egypt. They let I should go back there. My brother was born in 59, and do the math, he's only 59 now, actually, or about to be 59. We went then to Brazil in 1959. We think my dad was waiting for the call that eventually came that offered him a position at Iowa State University to be an assistant professor, and he stayed there his entire career. He retired in 1996. So this coincided with my elementary school years and was very much an idyllic Iowa hometown kind of small town girlhood. Elementary school, then middle school, where the only thing I really was worried about was, did I wear the same dress 2 days in a row, or 2 weeks in a row kind of thing. Then one day my dad came home and said, we're moving to the Philippines. And indeed, we did move to the Philippines, which was, I had to figure out where it was. And luckily I was taking geography at the time, and the teacher made me learn how to spell it. But we moved to the Philippines, where Dad was involved with a project that was funded by the Ford Foundation. It was a huge operation in the Philippines. We don't really understand the breadth of it, but they had their fingers in lots and lots and lots of projects in the Philippine Islands. And they had an infrastructure that we walked into. So we had this huge house. We had a gardener, we had a driver, we had a live-in maid, we had a cook. A seamstress came to the house every other week to make our clothes. So this was a very, very different life than the one we had been living in this ranch house in Ames, Iowa. And we had the wherewithal. There must be some financial things that go on with expats, because we had the wherewithal to do a lot of traveling during these years. We traveled in the Middle East, we traveled in Europe, we traveled a lot through Southeast Asia. And then in 1971, we went back to Ames, and suddenly this is a very different Ames for me. I had seen a lot. It was you got a sense of flyover country. It was a very different context to go back to Ames, and I was a different person going back to Ames. So this is 1971. In 1972, my grandfather was ailing, and my father in Rio, and my father was able to get a summer appointment, and so we went to Brazil for a summer, and so I was able to have that cultural context as well. So by age 16, that's 4 continents, right? That's North America, South America, Africa, and Asia. So a couple of really important things in terms of this cultural context. So in the Philippines, the social life was really structured around the club that you belonged to. And my father decided not to join the club that the rest of the Ford Foundation families had joined because, and this was an important life lesson to us, because of anti-Semitic and racist policy. So instead, we joined the Manila Polo Club, which took us to another level of affluence that I had never experienced before. You know, the royalty came to the polo club to play polo kind of thing. So this was an unbelievably affluent level of society juxtaposed against the slums of Manila, which were right outside the gates of our suburb. In Rio, we were within walking distance. We lived in a small apartment between Copacabana and Ipanema Beach. We could walk to the beach. It was winter, but it was still pretty warm. And out my bedroom window, I could see the favelas of Rio. So this issue of context became really salient to me. These are people living in the same country, speaking the same language, and yet the context was really, really different. The other thing that happened in Rio is that there was a very small English library, and I was a reader, and my mother I'd gotten through the fiction that my mother allowed me to read, so now I'm starting to pick up nonfiction books, which was an aberration for me, but somehow I went to the psychology section and started reading books on psychology, and age 16 decided I wanted to be a psychologist. I don't remember what the book was anymore, but it was really informative for me. So we go back to Ames. I graduate from Ames High, sorry, looking at my time. I graduate from Ames High and had decided to pursue this dream of being a psychologist. Did a paper for Mr. Forsman's English class on different types of psychology. For those of you who think that this career stuff doesn't matter, it does as you go along the way. And I decided I wanted to do counseling psychology. I volunteered. I was the youngest volunteer at our crisis line in Ames and continued that the rest of high school and then into college because I graduated from Iowa State in psychology. Now, if you do the math, I graduated in 3 years, and that was really because in those days you could test out of a lot of Spanish. So I was speaking Spanish, and so it's really not because I was that smart, I just tested out of a lot of Spanish. And I graduated in psychology, and there were 2 things that happened in college that were really critical. One is I really was continuing this interest, although not very well formed, on the influence of culture. So I took classes in anthropology. Our father was involved in a program called Technology and Social Change. I took those classes, and every time I took those classes, I was asking the questions about what's the influence of culture on individual behavior. And I didn't get really good answers on that. So I really knew I needed to go to graduate school, and that's what I wanted to focus on in graduate school. I had a mentor at Iowa State, Fred Borgen, who was very strong, a really proud counseling psychologist, and encouraged me to go to the University of Minnesota, as did the Dean of Letters and Sciences at Iowa State, who had been a professor of psychology at Minnesota and really encouraged me to go to Minnesota. Now, I had very high GPA, but very mediocre GRE scores. So I think it was those 2 people, letters of recommendation, that got me in, because I got to go to the University of Minnesota, then eventually working with Joe Ida. So when I got to Minnesota, this issue of cross-cultural counseling was really not a big thing there. I'm not going to make the jokes about, the amount of cultural diversity in Minneapolis, particularly at that time. Paul Pedersen had been there and started a class on cross-cultural counseling. I got to take that. But otherwise, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure for what I will just say in retrospect was a pretty unformed notion of what this issue of culture was. But I kept asking the questions. There were lots of people at Minnesota who were doing cross-national work, and I was interested in cross-national work. And Joe Ida was a tremendous support in my interest in doing cross-national work with the strong. in a, again, pretty unformed way at the very beginning. But anyway, so she and Renee Dowis, who was at Minnesota, were very, very strong supporters. And I left at the end of graduate school. I was interested in questions like cross-national interests, cross-national assessment, cross-national work. Is some work better than others? Does every culture see engineers in the same way, for example? Do the factors that go into making work decisions differ across national groups, and so on and so forth? So I graduated in 1984, and again, my advisor, am I lucky or what to have Joida Hansen as my advisor? Yes. So just to recap here, my cultural context is if you looked at any one of these lines, you would have a different trajectory, right? So somebody, you think I was born in Ames, graduated from Ames High, and I graduated from Iowa State. So that has one trajectory. Maybe you have a different trajectory for someone who lived in 4 continents by age 15, a different trajectory for somebody who's a first-generation American, at a time that was very valued, I might say. And then the most important factor in my career decision is my being a 4th-generation professor, because it's the family business. So anyway, all right. So counseling psychology, we really strongly mentored at Minnesota to be counseling psychologists. Our very first seminar with Renee Dowis was, "You are in the best profession in the world, and here are all the people in the University of Minnesota alone making," right, Jeff? Making contributions in counseling psychology. This is the best profession in the world, and I bought it hook, line, and sinker, drank the Kool-Aid, and make my students drink the Kool-Aid as well. So when I think about, it's really a calling for me, and the things that attracted me were the strengths orientation, it's contextually focused, and the role of work in people's lives. So I took that part of counseling psychology that is a strength in vocational psychology and really wanted to focus on that. I have to say, when I think about counseling psychology, the first thing that comes to mind are the professional relationships I've had. I swear that I could cry at all the wonderful people that are in this room, and I could bring up slides with all of you many of you in these slides, but I don't have the time, and I just want to focus on 2 groups of people. The first group are the friends that I made in graduate school in the late 70s and early 80s, who were Joida's advisees. She strongly mentored us to come together we had monthly meetings focusing on research, and we were strongly mentored to come to APA and present at APA. And for 40 years, we have been coming to APA and getting together at APA. Anybody who comes to APA gets together. Here is our first symposium in 1982 in Washington, D.C. On the far right is Jane Swanson. And there is our next, the following year in Anaheim. Jeff Prince is in the middle there. And so Jeff, Jane, Joida, and I, Beth Haverkamp, and Sarah Maltzman, who are sitting right here in the front, my peeps, and here we are on Tuesday night, because we all came together on Monday to spend a couple of days together in preparation for this presentation, for the convention, and for the presentation, and I couldn't have had a better group of people to spend a couple days, as I'm a little anxious getting ready for this talk. So the other group that I need to say, and I wish I could spend a little time talking about it, is Jean Carter and Linda Forrest. I don't know if Linda's in here, but Jean is sitting right here. And my career is so intertwined with these 2 women in ways that I hope I'll have space to talk about in the article that comes from this talk. But my deep and abiding love and appreciation and gratitude for all the support. So Joida talked about the leadership I've been involved in, and I would say that every single one of these has been really because of the people. So I got involved in the Council's Counseling Psychology training programs because this is a group of people that just get so committed and involved and interested in training and education of our students, which is such an important mission for me. I love getting together with the people at CCPTP, and I spent 2 terms on the executive board, and I get to go back as training director in the fall, and I will get to go back and be involved with CCPTP. The first time I was nominated, I never heard that no one asked me, so don't do that again this time if anybody is thinking about that. I also spent 20-some years on the executive board of the Society of Counseling Psychology and served as president in 2000 to 2001. And my presidential initiative was the Houston conference that I got to co-chair with Bob McPherson, which was absolutely great fun. But those 20 years of being on the executive board, and 20 years, sometimes elected, sometimes because I was the editor of the Counseling Psychologist, is if you have a chance to run for office in the Society of Counseling Psychology, it's a wonderful, wonderful group of diverse people coming together to really show their commitment and involvement and concern for the profession. And it's just really an amazing, amazing group of people that come again from very diverse perspectives, but come together for the health of our profession. And the incoming president is sitting right here, Ruth Bassinger. So I got to be the editor of the Counseling Psychologist from 2008 to 2013, and got to work with associate editors Brian Kim, Lisa Suzuki, and Betsy Altmeyer. And I love the work as editor of the Counseling Psychologist, because that journal plays a role in our field as not only identifying the scholarship in our traditional areas, but pushing the edges of what the field does, the populations we work with, new populations, new settings, and the way we approach different problems. And then I was editor-in-chief of the Handbook of Counseling Psychology, and again with Jean as associate editor, and Linda Subich as another associate editor. So that commitment to counseling psychology is most evident for me in my research on the study of work. And in 1984, do you love the bow? Yeah, right? Okay. So again, to recap, I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I was interested in cross-national kinds of issues and questions. But when I got to UWM, and what else is new, there was no money to do this research. I'm pointing to my dean here. At the time, this is pre-internet days. This is pre-internet days. And you had to have money to go travel to do any of that cross-national work. And so I kind of did a pivot to instead of looking at those cross-national questions, I started looking at the questions of work and factors influencing choices for racial ethnic minorities, which was an easy pivot to make because there's so many questions of, why are some occupations overrepresented with racial ethnic minorities, and why are some not represented or underrepresented by racial ethnic minorities? And then because I was always looking for funding for my doctoral students, it was an easy fit to go into STEM, looking at STEM careers, because that's where the money was, particularly from the National Science Foundation. So 2 early projects, one funded by Carnegie and the other funded by National Science Foundation, took place in the near south side of Milwaukee, which is predominantly Hispanic. These 2 projects could not have been more polar opposite. In the middle school, I got to work with these marvelous, marvelous teachers. We had a very integrated program. It was very structured. There was a lot of buy-in from the faculty and the administration, not so much in the second program at South Division High School. It was, to say it was an unmitigated disaster would be too much of a statement, but to say that, we encountered such things as the union grieving the project because the teachers didn't want to have to do the extra work. It just was not it just did not go well. We had 5 business partners, and the lack of communication between the business partners and the teachers was epic, I'll just say. And I learned 2 things from these projects. Number 1, I learned I learned about context in a really important way. The issues, the contextual issues that were facing the kids in this environment was incredible, particularly at the high school, where they were worried about the safety of getting to school. They were worried about having to leave to take care of siblings. They were worried literally about food on the table. So I could see the favelas out of my window, but I heard what that was like to live in those environments in the work I was doing in these schools. The second thing really important that I learned is I don't like intervention work. These are both intervention projects. I don't like intervention work. This does not play to my strengths. If I had wanted to be a high school teacher, I would not have gone to graduate school in psychology, okay? So I left the intervention work and I started doing more work on sort of basic research in such areas like the racial ethnic differences on the strong. I did a lot of research on that. And I did more, survey research, quantitative research. And I also I had been teaching master's level career development classes, and I was very interested in how do we promote students, counseling students, to incorporate culture, particularly into their career counseling. And Rosie Bingham and I developed a model called the Culturally Appropriate Career Counseling Model, catchy title. I couldn't find a little metric thing on that, but then Jane and I began writing a book on incorporating. Really, we were wanting students to learn how to apply theory into counseling, incorporated culture in a very explicit way in our master's level career theory and practice book. And the first edition, 98, second in 2008, third in 2013, and we have the fourth edition due to the publisher by January. But we have been very explicit about trying to incorporate culture into career counseling in a very inclusive way. As a parallel, I also was looking at gender in career choices. This is a picture with my colleague Phil Smith, who was a professor of statistics but had been a math teacher, high school math teacher, and we were very interested in what happens to girls at about 7th or 8th grade where they start to say, I don't want to do this math anymore, even though they've been very proficient in math. So we started to do a study with Gail Hackett. These two pictures are from, is that kind of weird angle, right? We started to do a study on the barriers and supports for girls and boys at middle, high school, and college. Cross-sectionally, it would have been better if it had been longitudinal, but we found some interesting things, that obviously there are differences between girls and boys, and I don't have time to talk about what we found, but this again was funded by the National Science Foundation, and we finished that project, and we started to look at what the next project was going to be, And a student who was on this project, graduate assistant, had been an engineer, left engineering to come to get a PhD in counseling psychology, and Mary Fitzpatrick is her name. And Mary said to me, we're doing all this to promote girls going into STEM careers, but half of the women who are engineers leave the profession. I did not know that. That was like eye-opening for me, and what that led to was a whole series of studies I've done with my colleague Romala Singh, who's in the School of Business, and we have now 15,000. We have surveys from 15,000 engineers, but the one that has hit the press the most has been the series of studies on women in engineering and why they leave and what the differences are between those who leave and those who stay. And so I get lots of email requests or interview requests from columnists and reporters asking about, why is it what's wrong with women? Why don't they stay in engineering? And I've learned to say, it's not about fixing the women. It's not about making them more confident. It's not about making a balanced work and family. The differences between the women who left and the women who stayed was about the environment. They found it unsupportive. They found it chilly. They found it uncivil. They didn't have opportunities for advancement. They didn't have an investment in training and development. So my comment has always been, it's not about fix the women. It's about fix the environment. And I also sometimes say, diverse teams bring better innovation, better design. And I had a conversation with a columnist, I'm not going to name him, from a prominent paper, who says to me, that's not compelling. What do you mean it's not compelling? He said, well, it's not compelling. It's not tied to the bottom line at all. I said, but you better, no, he said, it's really not compelling. Leaders are not going to care. All right, so I sputtered a bit. I was angry. I got off the phone and spent a bit of time talking to my husband about how angry I was and this stupid columnist. And then I called Romola, and I spent some time complaining to her as well. And then there were two things that came out of that were really kind of interesting. One was that we decided, okay, let's take this on. We need to do the good research on that. As it turns out, the literature on diverse teams leading to better innovation is pretty equivocal. So we got together with her colleague Ed Levitas, who's in business studying innovation, basically. And we have now another NSF grant that's funded that we're going to go back. We're going to look at teams, diverse teams, and whether that leads to innovation and financial performance. And that study starts in August, so I'm not done yet, right? The other thing that happened from this, which has really been kind of fun, is that whole issue of tying this to financial performance led to an agenda on trying to make firms accountable for creating environments where women will stay. And I'm working on this with my brother, who's a former global executive for Ernst & Young, and my husband, who's a professor of information systems. And we're collecting the financial performance reports with the Global Reporting Initiative on HR practices for publicly held companies, and we want to create a database on this so that this becomes publicly available, and there is some accountability on that. So anyway, that's kind of the next project. When I think about study of work, there's the research team. This is a year ago, and I have a bunch of students in this room, and they all know what this was like. But it is my favorite time of the week, this hour and a half I get to spend with my students, where we all think of different projects, and I'm always focusing, okay, what are your goals? How are you meeting your goals? But it's my privilege and honor to get to play this role in their careers. And so the study of work comes back for me as part of the braid with cultural context and the counseling psychology, investment in vocational psychology, in the work I get to do as editor of the Journal of Vocational Behavior. And Nita Contamnani is here, who is one of the associate editors. I have 9 associate editors, tremendous support from Elsevier for this journal. I love this work, and for me there's a circle, a closing circle with this because it's so international, and then I get to come back to those cross-national interests. And I love playing a role in authors, helping authors to craft their work, and so on and so forth. And then let me pull those strands back apart and talk a little bit about I'm on time, geez. Okay, future visions. So I would love to see that we would really do good work, and we'd answer the question, what works for whom when? Incorporating cultural context into that. So I talked about healing. What is it? What works in a healing process for which client at which point, critical point and juncture for them in their lives? I want a day where we talk about the role of work in people's lives and nobody asks, why do I have to take that vocational psychology class? Right? I want that day. I have a dream. I want that day. I want to get beyond check the demographic box. So you check African American, what does that mean? How salient is that to that individual? At what point and which problems is it salient? I want to get beyond check the demographic box, and I want to get so that we can talk about salience of multiple identities in ways that, you take an African American lesbian, what identity is salient, gender, race, sexual orientation, when? And how do we ask that without giving 150 questions at an intake, right? So I also think we need to study the validity of cultural context. I have spent 35 years saying we need to incorporate culture. We need to, it's essentially what I say to my students is cardiac validity. In my heart, I know it's true, but really we haven't studied this. Does it make a difference in counseling outcomes? I want to say one thing about counseling psychology, my future vision. To ensure the health of this profession, we must hold programs accountable for being a counseling psychology program where supervision is a strength, where cultural context is a strength, and vocational psychology is a strength. We must hold programs accountable. You don't get to call yourself a counseling psychology program if you don't have a vocational psychology course. Give me a break. That's not a counseling psychology program. And I get to say that because I'm standing here, right? So study of work, future visions, understand. So when you ask kids what they expect, what they dream of doing, and then you ask them what they expect to do, you don't see differences between those two questions for white kids, but you do see differences in those questions for racial ethnic minorities. I want to understand that gap, and I want to understand how we intervene so that that's not the case anymore. You know, so what is it that promotes these really incredible differences in occupational representation across, in occupations across racial ethnic groups? I'm sure it's complex factors, but how do we intervene if we don't really understand what it is? Is it barriers? Is it lack of supports? Is it people like me don't do this? And then how do we know what that is so that we intervene? I know it's complex. I know it's a combination of internal and external factors, but we need to understand to intervene to level that playing field. And then I just said this, and this is my dream, that we hold organizations accountable for climate, and that, you know, that newspaper reporter is going to be able to come to our website and say, see, Apple isn't doing a very good job on this, right? Or Microsoft or whatever. Well, let's edit that out of the video, probably, right? All right. Oh, I get to do this now. I'm done. All right, so huge thanks. My students, I've got current students in the room. I have former students in the room. I just am so honored in the role I've gotten to play in your lives. My colleague, Stephen Wester, is here. My former colleague, Shannon Chavez-Carril, is here. My dean flew in and surprised me. So thank you so much for creating the kind of work environment that I love to be part of. My Society of Vocational Psychology family, my APA family, my Society of Counseling Psychology family, look at all the past presidents in the room. I have just so loved being part of this division and this society. Counseling psychology is such a home for me. My grad school family, Jane, Jeff, Beth, and Sarah, thank you so much for coming in. The 6 of us in the last it's just been I could not have asked for more support over the last 40 years in the last 2 days than you guys have given me. And then, can I just say a word? Do you think about the mentoring that I have been able to have from this woman? Not only 40-some years, 41 to be exact, 41, mentoring as a counseling psychologist, mentoring as a researcher, mentoring as a president, she's president before me, mentoring as an editor, mentoring as a former Leona Tyler winner. So thank you for all of that, my honor. And my nominators, Jean Carter, David Bluestein, who I think had to go to another session, and Nita Kantamneni. And think about those 3 people just encapture my career in such important ways: Society of Counseling Psychology, Society of Vocational Psychology, and my wonderful students. And of course, Nita is a professor of counseling psychology, focusing on vocational psychology. Oh, and then last, my family. Oh my gosh. My brother, Sam Fouad, who's here, my husband, Bob Lighthizer, my kids. We're walking down the street to go to dinner last night, and I hear my son's voice, and it's like, seriously? Seriously. So Andrew and Delia came to surprise me last night. We went to get a drink. I'm getting cranky. I want to go home. And then they make me stay, and then Patrick slides in the booth. So all my love, you guys. I just could not have done this without you. And to all of you, thank you for coming. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Appreciate everyone coming. I know that we'll be asked to leave the room, but you finished right on time. But I suspect if there's anybody who needs a selfie with Nadya, she might be available outside the door.